Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Fun House alongside Mr. Fun himself, Martin Popoff.
All right. Morning, sir. Morning, sir.
Good
It's
morning.
winter is back for some reason in Toronto, but
Winter?
anyways, we'll warm things up with today's show. So
Yeah, we will. We will. It's been pretty warm here in New York. Although I think we're going to get a little cool down, like in the 70s, I guess. But I'm not sure what next week's going to bring. We got some hellacious rain yesterday. I don't know if you got any rain like over the last couple of days.
yeah, we got a
Yeah.
bunch of that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, so it was needed, but we don't get normal rain here in New York. We get pummeling rain. So like it'll rain for like a half hour, like come down like the heavens opened up, ruins all the plants, right? And then we're like, and then it just then the sun comes out. We're like, gee, you couldn't have stretched that out to an hour, make it a little lighter. Doesn't work
Yeah,
that way,
yeah.
but whatever. Anyway,
Yeah, there's that sort of there's sort of that, as you start going down the eastern seaboard, as a Canadian, you notice there's a little bit of that tropical a hint of vibe once in a while that comes through, right?
yeah, and more so in recent years
Yeah.
than we've ever had before, which is kind of strange, but yeah, whatever. It's kind of what we're dealt with, right? We don't really have a choice in the matter. Say, I don't like that. Stop it. Doesn't work that way.
Exactly.
Doesn't work that way. All right. So, Martin, you smelling something?
Yes, I am smelling something.
Yeah, bad smelling songs. That's what we're talking about today. So the whole concept here, this kind of, if you were watching carefully last week or listening carefully, Martin and I kind of hinted at this last week. It's these songs that give an album a probably a wrong perception or impression, right? So people kind of harp on one track and it's kind of maybe a weird song for the band, not really indicative of what they're all about, but people assume that because that one song is a little out there and weird that the rest of the album is really not worth anything, right? So it's the song kind of smells, so we stay away from it. It's almost like Martin, like if you can equate it to like food, you get a bad batch of like there's one bad piece of fruit in a batch, and you automatically assume the rest of the batch is no good just because that one piece is kind of
Yeah.
spoiled a little bit, kind of funky, but maybe it came from somewhere else and just thrown into the collective, and the rest of it's fine, but we push off the whole thing because of that one piece. Well, kind of the same thing here with this topic, where we have this one song that maybe is kind of notorious for all the wrong reasons, and we kind of the rest of the album we don't hold in a great light because of that song, right? So we've picked out each 15 songs that we think fit into this category pretty well. We'll talk a little bit about the song and the album and why you should maybe look past that song to discover the riches that are on the album itself. Martin, I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think you covered all the bases. And you can compare it. So you've driven home the point that this causes somewhat, in a negative light. Maybe as I look through these albums, we don't necessarily say the album's terrible or people think it is, but it does move the fulcrum a little bit that way in every
Barrier
case.
goes up, right? This
Yeah.
barrier. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. I mean, because you could have, you could talk about a show similar to this where it's like there's a hit song that absolutely dominates and it's the only thing everybody thinks about, but it is indicative of the album. Or you could even have even the further down the positive road where you could have albums where a song dominates and it's an amazing song and it makes the album actually seem better than it is, sort of thing. And that goes into that episode we did about peaks and valleys a little bit, right?
Yeah,
Where we
sure.
love albums so much, but it's because we're clouded by how awesome one or two songs is. So this is kind of the negative of that, and we've disciplined ourselves to stay at sort of one song sort of thing, and there's one that sticks out. So I'll start with my first five. We're doing 15 each. My first one is Revolution number 9 from this album. This is my big white album box set. I love this. This is one of the greatest box sets of all time. But I really do feel that, this is, it's my favorite Beatles album by a long shot. It's an amazing, massive, sweeping album with a lot of variety on it. But people do put it down for Revolution number 9. It's the most out there thing the Beatles ever did. It's the most out there thing on this album. It goes down that road of you get that bad impression that it's filler. We're filling up a double album. I was driving around listening to Clash Sandinista the other day, and man, there's a lot of filler on that, right? Where it's literally halfway to Revolution number 9 sort of thing. So the other thing I wanted to say about that song is, you can use that term. It's a metaphor for the album, or it's a microcosm for the album. Those two things mean two slightly different things, but I think it's kind of a microcosm for the negative impression that people have of that album. When they say it's disjointed, when they start talking down the road that, oh, they weren't working together and there's a bunch of solo songs put together with some Beatles songs and all that sort of thing. When they start putting down the White Album, Revolution number 9 is like that lightning rod for all those bad things that someone might think about the White Album. So that's my first one.
And for our we had a viewer last night on the Sabbath Stones episode that Chris Allen and I did about the new Sabbath box set, and he said, "How come you guys never talk about the Beatles enough on this channel?" Well, there you go.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my next one is Blue Oyster Cult, Going Through the Motions, from this album. So when Albert Bouchard himself talks about how we were trying to we wanted some of that Fleetwood Mac success sort of thing. So when you see people say things, that's the other way that this can happen too, is when you see people in interviews frame albums a certain way. But Going Through the Motions on this is the poppiest, weirdest thing on it. It's almost like a doo-wop song. And so again, it serves as a microcosm for those negative feelings people have of this album as being, a fairly mellow album, but it's really about as mellow as Agents of Fortune. It's about as mellow as Mirrors. It's about the same. Every Blue Oyster Cult album essentially, just moving away from the black and white period where it's kind of everything's mixed together and nothing's particularly heavy or nothing's particularly mellow. I think once you get into this period, it's like 1/3 of every album is heavy, basically, right? And so the funny thing is, the previous album had a song like that too, Debbie Denise. Yeah. People thought exactly the same thing about that. So there we've got kind of a 2-4. Next, I've got Alice Cooper. Oh, I skipped one. Sorry. Black Sabbath, Trashed is one of mine, and I literally don't have a physical copy of Born Again anymore. But Trashed is an interesting one where you might not think it sort of fits this thing, but when people start putting down that album, first off, it's always about the production, but people look at Trashed immediately as the first track on the album with that title that doesn't sound like a Black Sabbath title. And then this story about going drinking and crashing a car, right? Doesn't feel like a Black Sabbath lyric. So right away, everybody's going, this is why we don't want Ian Gillan in Black Sabbath. He's got too many drinking stories, right? He's got these flippant lyrics, right? So people think all the lyrics on the album are like that. And to be fair, some of them are a little bit like that. It's his awkward English as a second language wordplay thing that he does, right? But I've seen lots of Sabbath fans and people who want to put down the Born Again album point out this being, the secondary reason that I don't want to hear Ian talking about, getting in the car with Pete Retzi. In my Black Sabbath book, the whole story of this, Pete Retzi tells the whole story. It's fascinating, right? About them just going drinking, coming back, and then jumping in the rent-a-car and wrecking the rent-a-car and flipping it over. And I don't know. Have I told this? I'll just say it briefly, but my favorite part of the story, because I probably mentioned it before, but when Pete says, we were lying upside down in that car, and Ian is has got a cigarette in his mouth upside down, and gas is leaking out, and he's got a lit cigarette, and I think he said the cigarette dropped into the gas, or maybe how did he phrase it? He might have said that if it would have dropped into the gas, but he says it wouldn't have lit the gas because he says, if you drop a lit cigarette into the into gas, it won't light or something. This is the way he sort of told the story. But he said the car could have blown up. You would have thought the car would have blown up, but I know that had the lit cigarette dropped in the gas, it wouldn't have blown up. But yeah, there was gas pouring out all over the place. They're sitting upside down, strapped in to this thing. Ian's got a cigarette. Anyways, it's all in my Sabbath book. So my next one. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is my fourth is Alice Cooper, I Never Cry. So we basically think of Alice Cooper in these years. You know, these albums are fairly successful, but they're all successful for one reason. They have a complete, not even a power ballad. You could just call this a mainstream, just rock TV talk show ballad kind of thing,
Yeah.
Alice Cooper. And this one is known for that. You look at that cover, it's called Goes to Hell. It's got a couple of heavy songs on it, but no, you think about I Never Cry when you think of Alice Cooper in this period. You think of the single cover, you think of how big a song that was, and that's why this went gold. And my last one, I don't have a physical of this anymore, but Dire Straits, Money for Nothing. I did a podcast episode of History in 5 Songs with these heavy songs on albums that you know, I have this opinion that this theory that everybody likes heavy metal, they just don't know it, sort of thing. And that's why Barracuda is such a big hit, or Jefferson Starship Jane, or Robert Palmer Jealous, you know. But so this is an odd one in that you hear Mark Knopfler turning on a distortion pedal and playing a hard rock riff to a song, right? And it's also, so it's uncharacteristic, but everybody only thinks of that song. So it's almost like that song, and with the I Want My MTV and Sting distraction thing, it's almost like that song wipes out the memory of what you actually, or what Dire Straits, you know, built their fame on, which is that really interesting Dylan-esque Spanish guitar, acoustic guitar, up-tempo pop. You know, they were almost considered like a post-punk band in that they had this weird name of the band. Dire Straits sounds almost like a punk band if you think about it. And it's 4 guys and it's coming out in the punk era, but it was like the most mainstream smooth rock you can imagine. It was almost like an Eagles Steve Miller thing, right? But that song almost like single-handedly wiped out the memory of who Dire Straits was, which is kind of weird. So hang on, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my first 5.
Yeah, that's like a whole other conversation. Like, what is Dire Straits music? Right? Because they don't sound like anybody else. Very unique. It's very hard to kind of categorize them. And yeah, but that song sticks out like big time in their catalog. I mean, certainly on that album, but I think in the entire catalog, there's nothing else that they ever did that sounded like that.
Yeah.
All right, so my first pick of the day is a song by a guy named Billy Squier. It's from an album called Signs of Life, which is this one right here. It's a song called Rock Me Tonight. Actually, a pretty good song. This is, and there's a couple of these in my list of where not only the song itself, which is a little bit of a deviation from what he did on prior albums. You know, Don't Say No was a huge album for him, pretty heavy album, but also some really good pop stuff on there as well. You had Emotions was kind of similar. Rock Me Tonight is much, much more playful and quirky. And then he did that video. And that video basically just like horrified so many people that they went away from this album in droves. And I think everybody now assumes that this 4th album by Billy Squier is not a very good album because of the stigma of that song. When actuality, you know, in actual, Signs of Life is very good. And Rock Me Tonight, I think, is a very good song. It is different for him, but you know, it's amazing how what a really horrible video, and the video I think was meant to be tongue in cheek, but here you got Billy jumping around with all this linen and stuff in his bedroom and it just put a really bad light on his career. And I'm sure if you were to ask him himself, you know, what happened to your career, he would go right back to that video. Actually, a pretty good song, but I think everybody needs to give this album another chance. Whether you like that song or not, I think there's a kind of stigma there that kind of ruins the rest of the album for most people. All right, next up, again, this has a lot to do with a video and a first single being picked for an album that really wasn't the right choice and doesn't represent the album at all. And that is No Stranger to Love from Black Sabbath's 7 Star. Right, so of course this was supposed to be a Tony Iommi solo album. They decided to call it Black Sabbath featuring Tony Iommi. You got Glenn Hughes on vocals here. They strangely enough release the bluesy ballad "No Stranger to Love" as the first single on the album. doesn't really sound like Sabbath at all. It's moody. It's just kind of poppy, kind of atmospheric and whatnot. Then you got the strange video of them all standing around these big black jackets, and Glenn's got the big beard and he's looking kind of heavy with the big jacket. And it just doesn't represent the rest of the album. And I've talked to so many people over the years that are like, yeah, what's up with that No Stranger to Love album? It's like, well, yeah, that was the single. That was the song. It should have never been picked as the opening example of what the album is all about to everybody, because you got these other bangers on here like In for the Kill and Turn to Stone and the title track Danger Zone. I mean, you could have picked anything else and they picked that. And again, I get it, because around this time, Martin, what were we being kind of bludgeoned with? The power ballads all over the place, right? But that's not Black Sabbath, right? That was never going to be Black Sabbath. So just, for folks who have never given this album a chance because of that song, reconsider it. That's my number 2. Number 3, I Can't Dance from We Can't Dance by Genesis. I'll be the first to tell you, I'm as guilty as anybody. I hate that song. And I have, for many, many years, just never even wanted to have anything to do with this record because of that song. So I'm a perfect example of that. Whereas, and that they played that song all over the place. Radio, MTV, you name it, you couldn't escape it. To me, it's the most annoying song they've ever done. I don't like it at all. However, older me said, well, I'm going to investigate the rest of this album. I mean, No Son of Mine was also a big hit too. That's a really good track. Jesus, He Knows Me, that was a pretty good song too. Also a hit. Driving the Last Spike is good. You got Hold on My Heart is the kind of sappy ballad on here. But you got a couple tracks towards the end. And actually, it's not my favorite Genesis album by far, but another example of don't judge a book by one page in the book. And even though I Can't Dance is put down by a lot of people, I know Martin likes this album a lot. But there's more to it than just that one song. And it's a smelly song, but the rest of it there's some flowers to be found in this album, I think.
The funny thing about that song is you could almost picture it being busked. It's almost like you could picture a guy standing there with his crappy sounding electric guitar out on the street and a vocalist and a little drum box. And that's it, right?
That's all you need, right?
And Genesis is the absolute epitome of the complete opposite of that, right? They're just like a sound army, right?
Right.
And yeah, you just listen to that song and you think, oh, is this like one guy doing all this, right?
Yeah. And that same guy, that man on the corner, could literally turn I Can't Dance into like a 20-minute epic, right? Just over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Funny. All right, so that's number 3. Number 4, I'm going to go with Babe by Styx off the Cornerstone album. Again, a song here. This is a perfect example of a track that became a huge hit and attracted a lot more people to the music of the band that probably had never listened to them before. And it's not indicative of anything else they'd ever done. Is Babe a great pop song, pop ballad, whatever? Sure it is. But they never really did anything like it before. They've done a few things like it afterwards, but this was kind of the start of that. But again, most people assume that around this time with Babe, they sold out, they went pop, all the hard rock and the prog and all that stuff was kind of left behind, whatever. But there's some great tracks on here, right? I mean, Lights is great. YB's a great rocker. You got Never Say Never, upbeat track. Boat on the River is majestic. Borrowed Time kills. Eddie's a big hard rocker. Love in the Midnight rocks too. So again, the rest of the album's not really anything like Babe at all, but it was a huge, huge hit. Drove the sales of this album to like astronomical levels. And but yeah, there's much, much more on this album than Babe. And also, I think there's always this perception that once they did this album and had that hit, the band were never the same again. Meanwhile, a lot of great songs to come after this, right? But they started to dabble. I think Dennis got the whole thing. Well, we can do pop stuff too. So you saw a little bit of that on each album going forward. But yeah, that's number 4. And number 5, this was pulled out at the 11th hour here this morning. It just kind of came to me. Valley Girl by Frank Zappa, from Ship Arriving Too Late to Save a Drowning Witch.
Yeah.
Whatever that means. It's funny, for years I had this and I never realized that there's the witch hat and the ship, and it's like I just thought this was some funky looking cover, right? But Valley Girl is this total like novelty song, right? Just absolutely weird. It's got Moon Unit Zappa doing the Valley Girl stuff, his daughter, and it's just, I remember people either loved it back in the day or they're like, what the hell is this crap? But the rest of the album is filled with the normal Frank Zappa, jazzy, fusiony, artsy stuff. And it's not like anything else on here. I mean, Come From Nowhere is terrific. No, Not Now. The title track is really good. You got Envelopes on here, which is really cool musically. So just a weird song in his catalog. And I wonder like how many people either were, I mean, on the opposite end of the spectrum, Martin, how many people had never listened to a lick of Frank Zappa's music, loved Valley Girl as a single, and then bought this and they're like, what the hell is the rest of this stuff? That doesn't sound like Valley Girl. So there's like two ends of the spectrum here. So, but yeah, the really good album though, otherwise, musically speaking. Valley Girl is kind of fun for what it is, but it's not like the rest of it.
Yeah. I mean, No Not Now is one of my favorite Zappa songs. It's
Oh,
a
it's terrific.
beautifully recorded album
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. And Valley Girl is basically a sloppy heavy metal song,
Pretty
which is
much.
pretty
Yeah.
bizarre, right? So, Frank's had little bits here and there where he's done heavy things, but never quite in this way either. It's usually if he's ever done heavy stuff before, and like I say, he periodically has, it's usually like a heavy metal riff in almost like a fusion vibe, right? Like it's
Well,
just a
because that's what he
but this is
excels at.
actually tribal drums and sloppy and really kind of distorted, dirty sounds, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, it's absolutely an outlier. Okay, so my next example is of a bad smelling song is Jamaica from House of the Holy, right? Pronounced Jamaica or Jamaica or kind of thing, Dire Maker. It's impossible to spell. It all ticks me off every time I have to type because I have to figure
And
out.
everybody says there's a different way to pronounce it, which is
Oh
crazy.
my God. And writing it, you just have every time I have to look it up, I must be up to over 100 times. Where do you put in those two apostrophes, right? But bad smelling song in that it basically clouded everybody's opinion. I mean, this is an 11 times platinum album. It's done just fine, thank you. But basically people said, oh, Zeppelin's just joking around with us. They're just tossing stuff off. Oh, they just want to try the reggae thing and look how badly they do it and all that sort of thing. And it actually has a second one of those Easter eggs called the Cringe, which gets the same abuse, right? It's like, oh, they're just ripping off James Brown. It's another joke song. Look, man, it's been 3 years since your last album and you put 2 joke songs on it. Like, what are you guys doing kind of thing? They don't care about the fans, blah, blah, blah. They're not serious, right? Okay, my next one almost is a category of its own. The whole idea of the infamous cover songs, but I went with Motley Crue, "Smoking in the Boys' Room," which it was like them kind of going poppy, going novelty. I mean, it's a fairly heavy song. That's another one. That's one of those songs where it's a heavy song by a band and they're known for that band, Brownsville Station, and the rest of the catalog isn't that heavy. You think it would be because everything looks really heavy with those guys, right?
Yeah, they totally looked apart, right?
Yeah. But we were ticked off when that happened. It's basically, okay, what? So you can't write songs anymore. You got to cover stuff. You're just going for the novelty ballad. You're doing the Quiet Riot thing, sort of thing. So that's my next one. Next one is Ted Nugent, "Wango Tango" from this album. I know I've heard many times, people who know who Ted Nugent is just having a little mental lapse call this Ted Nugent's Wango Tango album. Like, literally, people think this album's called Wango Tango. Some people, right? Because Scream Dream's a little bit like Wango Tango, right? It's got the same is that what do you call that? Would you call that a double homonym? I'm not sure, but or a double rhyme, right? Scream Dream, Wango Tango. And it's the first track on the album, and it sort of makes you think, well, he's already done Cat Scratch Fever, and look, now he's being jokey again. And the problem with that song, I've always called it an underwritten song, because it's just got this really boring I think it's a two chord riff, right? And it just goes throughout with minor variations, and there's not much to the lyrics. It's just a goofy dance song, right? And yeah, underwritten music, underwritten lyrics, first song on the album, the hit on the album. So it's like Ted becoming a comedy act kind of thing. And that was the bad smelling song in this, because this actually, Terminus El Dorado is kind of the same thing too. But this album is actually one of my very favorite Ted Nugent albums, if not my very favorite. It's way up there for me because it does have some good heavy songs on it, Flesh and Blood and stuff like that, Scream Dream itself. But yeah, so after Wango Tango, Wango Tango, as per the definition of the show, just basically took over the album, and everybody thinks it's a comedy album. It's a Cheech and Chong album. He looks like Cheech and Chong, right? On Free for All. So it's that sort of thing. My next one is Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall, Part 2. From this album, right? This is another whole theme that we can have, and we may have other ones coming up here or honorable mentions or whatever, but has Pink Floyd gone disco? So that's the first thing. You think it's literally a chicken scratch disco guitar part over a complete disco riff. Rhythm. And then the other thing is the whole "We Don't Need No Education." It became the song for kids about rebelling against school, right? So it had all these distractions to it, and that's not what the album's about. And the music is not what the album's about either. Generally speaking, it's a typical Pink Floyd album with a lot of dour, dark, murky, slow songs, no drums on a lot of things, acoustic guitar, sound effects, all that kind of stuff, right? But Another Brick in the Wall Part 2 is like the most commercial thing on it. It is disco, and it's about school. And then my last one of this round is Black Sheep of the Family from this album, where is Richie, they don't write their own songs, they're doing a cover. It's a goofy elf kind of song. So it's basically the bad smelling thing on here. It's the song where we all discuss all the time. It's like, you don't have very good instincts, right? I mean, there's nothing great about this song. It's a cover. It sounds like an old elf song. How is this the song, the basis for an entire band, a band that's going to, have ultimate amazing greatness with the next album immediately? So it's like, to me, that's the main problem with it. It's like, you're not very smart about this rock and roll thing, are you, Richie? Like, what is this all about? Like, why are we covering Black Sheep of the Family from Quatermass, right? It's just a weird sort of thing.
Yeah, that was the idea for doing Rainbow, right? That song. It's like, I want to do that song, and I want a new band to do it, right? It's like, okay.
Yeah. And that is the last of my next batch of 5.
All right. And I just want to preface all, I should have said this at the beginning, but we don't necessarily dislike some of these songs, right? In fact, I like quite a few of these. But it's just we're kind of talking about the general perception of these.
Yeah, songs. Nor do we dislike these albums, right?
Right, exactly.
Because,
yeah. We just these songs stick out like a sore thumb on these albums, and over the years we have heard so many people kind of talk in negative terms about the album, but really what they're really talking about is the song and not the album. All right, next up, we're gonna go to Queen's The Game album. You can pick a couple of them on here, but I decided to go with a Crazy Little Thing Called Love. Queen doing kind of rockabilly. What's that all about, right? And a lot of people generally cite this album. I mean, this was a huge breakthrough, especially here in North America. But this album does move away from a lot of the things they did on most of those 70s albums. But people cite Crazy Little Thing Called Love as, Queen going pop, Queen going back to being a singles band, Queen selling out, whatever. And you could say the same thing for Another One Bites the Dust, right? Which is more of this kind of like that urban funk type thing. But you go deeper on this album, the title track, or Play the Game, is very Queen sounding. Dragon Attack is a great rocker. Save Me is a great anthem. Sail Away Sweet Sister, Don't Try Suicide. A lot of the really good things on here, but everybody always harps on the hits here. And again, the album, The Game, always gets talked about when it comes to Crazy Little Thing Called Love or Another One Bites the Dust. It's all about those hits. Forget everything else. And the people who don't like this album or don't like this period in the band going forward, they cite those hits as the reason why they don't like them. So, But yeah, a lot of good stuff on there regardless.
Exactly. Yeah.
We've talked about this album a lot in recent months, but let's go to Down to Earth for, of course, Since You've Been Gone. Rainbow, here, another Rainbow cover, right? So here we've got a brand new lineup, new singer, classic Rainbow stuff on here, but of course the single and all the attention was on Since You've Been Gone, written by someone else, probably most notable for Rainbow doing this Rust Ballard track. But it's not really indicative of the rest of the, maybe you could say All Night Long, but it's definitely Rainbow doing kind of more of a pop rock direction or an AOR direction, which ironically enough, I think this really hit home with Richie. And then going forward, once they brought Joe Lynn Turner into the band, they tried to do a lot more stuff like this. So very indicative of direction going forward. Maybe not quite for this album, but everybody focuses on Since You've Been Gone. It was somewhat of a minor hit. They did a video for it, all that kind of stuff. So, and how many was that? That's 2, 3. Let's go over to Santana, the Z-Bop album with Winning. So Santana by this time, so this was what, 1983. Santana not selling as many records as they used to back in the early mid 70s, and decided to again enlist the talents of a guy, Russ Ballard, once again, same guy as Rainbow did, to write this song called Winning, which is just strictly a pop song with some neat little Santana guitar stuff on there, vocals, right? However, the rest of the album is classic sounding Santana. It's all that kind of Latin jazz fusion type stuff. There's great tracks all over this, some killer instrumentals. But Winning was the single. And I think most people look at this album at this point in their careers like, this is just Carlos wanting to kind of get back into the limelight, sell some more records again. Let's just do some pop hits. And this is a pop album. Really isn't. It's actually a very, very strong album. I personally think Winning is a really great track, but there's so much else on there that represents all that is great about Santana. Mm-hmm. Next up, let's do another cover. Johnny Be Good, Judas Priest from Ram It Down. Yeah. I mean, in this instance, all right, this is a shit song. This is like, and you know, they did a video for it. They released it as a single. And I think that Judas Priest fans at the time, maybe the hardcore fans were not as into Turbo and wanted something to get back to heavy times for Priest. And, you know, you look at this album cover, you think, all right, this is going to be a really heavy Priest album. And it actually pretty much is for the most part. But what do? They bludgeon everybody with Johnny Be Good off the bat, and most folks hated it. So how many people just basically ignored this album, waiting for the next one because of Johnny Be Good, when actually there's probably half of this album is really heavier than anything on Turbo and pretty good, especially the title track, which should have been like the single. That should have been the song that they based this whole album on, but they didn't. Yeah. Big mistake. Yeah. Big mistake.
It's funny, Pete, you know, thinking of Turbo Lover, it's so weird. It's like people make fun of that album and they will pick Parental Guidance or Rock You All Around the World or whatever, but they will pick Turbo Lover because it's like, oh, isn't that funny? Rob saying I'll be your Turbo Lover sort of thing, right? And it's like an approximate title track or whatever. But the funny thing about Turbo Lover is it's a masterpiece of a song, and it's probably the best song on the album, right? And it's a fairly heavy song too, right?
Yeah. I think, Martin, at the time, the perception of it's got a catchy chorus and they're using guitar synthesizers, and that's what did it. Because I will tell you, I've seen Priest a lot in recent years. When they play Turbo Lover live, the arena goes nuts. Yeah. People love to hear that song live. So people can shit on that album and that song all they want, but the people who are paying money to go see them live in concert love that song. They do. I thought about picking Turbo. Turbo Lover. I really did, but I think Johnny Be Good is a better example for this.
Oh yeah.
It's just, I mean, how many people just because of that, they're just like, oh, Ram It Down, like the second crappy album in a row from them. Good. So it's perfect for this. Let's see, what am I
think you got one more.
One more. All right, so we're gonna go with Hot Dog. Little Led Zeppelin rockabilly from In Through the Outdoor. Again, this album, you could probably pick a few songs on here, right? Because you got kind of like the weepy ballad, you got the bluesy number, you got the kind of shuffle song. But to me, Hot Dog always kind of stuck out like a sore thumb here. And I don't dislike Hot Dog. I think it's well done for what it is. But does anybody want to hear Led Zeppelin playing, you know, rockabilly type stuff like Boogie to Like This? Not necessarily, right? But it is well done, and it's not like they didn't dabble a little bit with this in the past. I think they did a little bit on Presence, and certainly Robert, you know, and even Jimmy a little bit dabbled into this going forward. You had the Honey Drippers and whatnot. So maybe a kind of like foreshadowing of things to come, but it does kind of stick out like a sore thumb on this album, I think, because there's some cool artsy stuff on here. And I think, you know, we've talked about in the past many times about how John Paul Jones really kind of dominates this record. I don't think that song really has much to do with him. That's
Yeah.
probably Robert and maybe Jimmy to an extent interjecting some things that they were looking to do. But yeah, it's kind of a weird one on this album, I think. And, you know, a lot of people like pick apart certain things of this album to kind of discount it as being, you know, one of the great Led Zeppelin albums of its time. But yeah, Hot Dog from In Through the Outdoor.
All right. Okay, my next one is Rush Roll the Bones. It's the only thing people basically remember from this album. This album is not very heavy. It's really a lot like Presto. They kind of go together. But people remember Roll the Bones because of the little rap part in it. And that just drives everybody crazy. It's the first thing they think of. Obviously, it's the title track, and it's the title track to a song with a really catchy title to it, right? But yeah, they always remember that. And then the bookmark to this is one you came up with, a great idea, The Illusion of Power from Black Sabbath, right? Produced by Ernie C, but it's got the little Ice-T cameo doing a little rap in it. And people just, you know, that's it. They throw their hands up and say, I can't
Lose
deal
their
with
mind.
this album simply because of that, right? You know, and had that not been there, probably people wouldn't talk about Ernie C's production so much, because you listen to it and you go, the production doesn't stick out as being terrible. You just know that it's by Ernie C, kind of thing, and then all of a sudden you start picking it apart, right?
Until you listen to the new remix on the box set, then you realize that it's not very well.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, okay.
But yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Those two songs are like so identical, right? Because you've
Yeah,
got this like little, what, 20-second segment that everybody's like, oh my God, it's terrible for that. You pull that out of Roll the Bones. I personally think Roll the Bones is a great song. And I actually think Illusion of Power is, I mean, I've been listening to it because I was reviewing the box set. I've been listening to Forbidden a lot of late. And Illusion of Power is this big, dark, heavy, doomy track, right? And then all of a sudden you got Ice-T
yeah,
there, and it's just like, it doesn't kind of fit, right? But otherwise, take both those pieces out, nobody complains anymore.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, so my next one is Pat Travers' "Boom Boom Out Go the Lights" from the live album and on a studio album as well. But you know, it's a huge distraction on this album. I love the way you put it before. Like you talked about in our Travers thing, how I don't get that song, I don't like that song.
Never
Me
did.
too. I completely agree. It's just a goofy, shuffly, boogie crowd participation song. I hate crowd participation song, period. Anyways, but it's the biggest hit. Basically, I would say that he ever had. Snorting Whiskey,
Yeah.
I suppose, is a big hit too. But and it's not indicative of the rest of the album. The rest of the album is just a great mix of all his heavy stuff, his heavy, funky stuff. This band is just on fire. These iconic live shots of the band. That's basically what this album sounds like.
Oh yeah.
Bunch of guys outside having fun at a big, you know, outdoor show. It's just so groovy and rhythmic. And yeah, everything else on this album is basically a 2-track mind of those two ideas. Stevie's maybe a little mellower, but yeah, Boom Boom Out Go the Lights is just it's just a dumb, goofy song. And
I will never ever understand why that's the only song that most people know from Pat Travers. I don't get it. He's got so many other great songs, and that's
yeah.
Don't even get me started.
Okay. My next one is Twisted Sister, Leader of the Pack, down back into the same idea as Motley Crue, the whole cover idea. And you know, picking a dumb 60s cover that no one wants to hear, and you feel like they're running out of steam, and then the stories start coming out that they're not getting along, and you know, D might go solo. It's kind of a little bit like David Lee Roth a little when you come to think about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, and this one comes with a second Easter egg too, like a few that we've talked about here. Be cruel to your school, spelt wrong, like the whole Slade and Quiet Riot thing. So again, you got two things taking you back to Quiet Riot: the Slade spelling and the covering of things, right? So yeah, Leader of the Pack is just this goofy 60s, you know, kind of girl group song, right? And yeah, ridiculous. And that, so again, back to the theme of the show, when you think of this album, that's all you think about.
That's all you think about
those two songs. You don't think about the rest of it, where they're trying to get down to business and still pretty heavy. production's hard on the ears, but you know, it's a typical Twisted Sister album for the rest of it, right? And then I've got Van Halen Jump, which, you know, basically people think of the album maybe as keyboardy or as going mellow or whatever, or going very poppy. But the whole rest of the album, other than say I'll Wait, is typical, you know, up tempo guitar, bass, and drums, Van Halen, down to business. No covers on this album. So it's a pretty serious, hardworking album, but Jump doesn't seem like a hardworking song. It just seems completely light and buoyant and you know, positive. And the whole rest of the record is just good old rock and Van Halen. Let's see. Do I have one more? Yes. Warrant Cherry Pie. So we've got Cherry Pie. So this is the song Janie Lane couldn't live down, and he complained about it to his dying days. It was part of his drinking problem almost, right? You know, it's the first song on Greatest and Latest when they redo the hits sort of thing. It's of course on the Best of Warrant. And basically it's the song that you know, well, you know, come to think of it, the album cover is themed, and it gets you know, it's all tied in together sort of thing. And you know, people think of those big gang vocals and that big sort of stripper beat to it, and that's literally, as per Janie's tragic story, it's literally the only thing anybody thinks about when they think about Warrant. Warrant is the big ridiculed band, you know, along, people say Winger, Warrant, and Whitesnake, right? It's one of the W bands. But basically, it's the only song anybody thinks about. They literally think of that song as being the song that killed hair metal and caused grunge almost, right? It's just got everything bad and hair metally about it, the big production and the sexual innuendo and all that kind of stuff, right?
And
And
that video didn't help matters. Another instance of a video basically kind of killing a band, right?
yeah, good point. And they tried to respond with, you know, Dog Eat Dog, you know, trying to be a little heavier and all that stuff. And Warrant, generally speaking, you dive into those albums and there's a lot of good, you know, heavy hair metal across those albums. They shouldn't have been totally ridiculed. So that is my last one of my 15.
All right, cool. All right, next up for me is Red, White, and Blue from Lynyrd Skynyrd from Vicious Cycle. So this is, I think, kind of the band's wanting to do a sequel to Sweet Home Alabama, something in that mold. And it comes at a time, so this was what, 2003. So, you know, a couple of years after the September 11th attacks, and, you know, Skynyrd all of a sudden taking it upon themselves to try and unite Americans and this whole Americana, we are the greatest country in the world type of thing. And, you know, maybe taken a little bit too far for some people. So, and I think Red, White, and Blue, actually, it's a really good song for what it is. And I'm just surprised it wasn't a bigger hit. But I think a lot of people just kind of got turned off by them. And they would continue to do stuff like this on the albums that would come after, where they just seem like they're trying too hard about we're proud Americans, all that sort of thing. You know, we're patriots and all that. But the rest of the album is a banger of an album. This is like one of the heavier Skynyrd albums, just some great stuff on here. That's how I like it. Dead Men Walking is great. Hell or Heaven. I mean, just a lot of really good stuff on here. But I think everybody just remembers that single. It's like, it's probably Skynyrd doing this Americana country rock type of thing. I'm not really all that interested, which is a shame. Really good album. Next up, I'm going to stick with the Southern Rockers. How about Satisfied Man from The Deed Is Done, Molly Hatchet. So this is an example, Martin, of a Southern rock band taking a look at kind of another one. It's like, well, ZZ Top added kind of those electronic drums and the very kind of mechanical sound and catchy choruses. Maybe we could do the same thing. Forget about the three guitar army. Ooh, I'm a satisfied man. It's just, and the video, it's just so ridiculous. So trying to be ZZ Top. But I mean, the rest of the album is actually really, really good. Got Backstabber on here, Man on the Run, Good Smoke and Whiskey, Heartbreak Radio. I mean, a lot of fun stuff on here. It's actually a decent Molly Hatchet record, but you know, Satisfied Man's the first song. That's the song they played. That's the video. It's like, it just like turns people right off of it. Next up, going to go with Amanda by Boston from the Third Stage album. You know, here you got, you're waiting years and years and years for a new Boston record. So this was what, 1986, like 8 years after the last one. And of course, Amanda was picked by the label to be the big single. and it kind of sounds like a rehash of some of their stuff from the previous album. Similar sound, but it's more like a ballad. There's not really a lot of kick-ass guitars on here. And I think by this point, people, it still sold a lot, this album, but I think by this point, people have kind of moved on from waiting for that next big Boston record. Maybe Amanda didn't really sit so well with people, but there's a lot of the really good stuff on this album. It's a very, very solid record that really isn't all that indicative of what that opening single Amanda was. Kind of a shame, but whatever. Maybe the poster child for this episode is The Final Countdown by Europe. So, I mean, Martin, I have been defending this band forever. And I can't tell you how many people I talk to in person, online. When I mention Europe, they're like, oh, The Final Countdown. I hate that band. I hate that song. It's like, well, have you ever listened to anything else other than that? No, I just can't get past that song.
And then they reach out and do this. The hand comes
I've
out.
heard it a
Right?
million times. I never want to hear it again. It's like, all right, I get it. But there's a lot more to this album and certainly this band. Yeah, I get Carrie kind of fits in here as well. But man, Rock the Night, Cherokee, Ninja, all great songs on here. And I think so many people just, it's a perfect example of a song just getting overplayed in every outlet, sporting, games and events and TV and radio and MTV. I mean, you couldn't escape the song. You still can't. But man, this band is just so much more than that song. I've already talked about this a million times on the channel. I'm not going to go any further here, but perfect example of what we're talking about here, where just that one song, it's like, oh, to so many people, that's that bad smelling song. I hate it. It's like, well, the rest of the album is really good.
And the funny thing about that song that I love is that you get into the verse and it sounds like a Swedish frostcore album on Sword Records, from 1983 that you had to get as an import. It's like a completely Euro rocking early proto power metal song.
Right? Yeah, it's nothing wrong with it, but this is how overexposure can kill a really good song, because it is a really good song, I think.
Yeah.
All right, here's another one one of the first ones I thought about. We were getting ready to do this. 17 by Winger off their debut album. Again, the lyrics are terrible, right? You're not going to get away with that kind of stuff today, right? This is the 80s. It's their kind of like bubblegum hair metal song. It was all over MTV, it was all over the radio. And I think, unfortunately, most people think of 17. That's what Winger is all about. When in actuality, the rest of the album is really, really good. Their whole catalog is dynamite. They've never done anything even remotely like 17 again. It's kind of a similar thing with Europe and The Final Countdown. That song's not like anything else they've ever done. Same thing with Winger. 17, yes, it's juvenile, it's ridiculous, it's cheesy and all that kind of stuff. But man, the rest of the album is just filled with great. And Madeline is great. Hungry is heavy, they do State of Emergency. Hanging On, Headed for a Heartbreak is a great kind of like moody, proggy metal track. Really, really good stuff, and a great band. So talented, great guitars. Kip Winger is an amazing singer and songwriter, but it's unfortunate how 17, ridicule on Beavis and Butthead for that song. So it was really coming from all angles. It's almost like they can never really recover from it, which is unfortunate, because this band has a really great catalog and so much good stuff, but they're always remembered for that one kind of jokey juvenile song, which is a real shame, because there's lots of good stuff on this album and in their catalog. So yeah, that's my last one for today. And
such a parallel with Warrant, with one song, right? And killing hair metal, right? It's like, okay, the epitome of hair metal excess at the end of hair metal. It's got to die, all that sort of thing. Yeah. So
thankfully, I think Kip was able to kind of handle the bad press from that, and then he's just kind of moved on from it, and he just continues to do his own thing. I think that's what you have to do. Janny, I'm not really sure what he obviously had a lot of other stuff going on, but it's just a shame that stuff like that could just bring you down so much, right? It's terrible. Yeah. So anyway,
we've got a long list of honorable mentions here. Do you want me to go through the first half and then I'll turn it over to you and you can pick out the ones from the other, or do you have it handy?
I have it handy. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to go to the end of Queen plus a couple other ones that I mentioned here.
Okay.
Okay, so some new ones that you hadn't seen that I thought of this morning were the Grateful Dead, Touch of Grey.
Oh yeah, that's a good one.
So, that's like painted them as a seniors band almost.
Yep.
Iggy Pop, Wild One, goofy cover. Can't Write Songs, Dancy Song, kind of like very corporate. Tigers of Pantang, Love Potion #9, kind of
Oh,
bothered this one, another goofy 60s cover. Yes, Owner of a Lonely Heart. It's like, oh, Yes is the Police now. No, they're not. Right.
good
You're
choice. I didn't even think
here
of that.
for this now, right?
Yeah.
And then we had Aerosmith, Janie's Got a Gun, Aerosmith, Crying. We had Anthrax, Toast to the Extra, which kind of kicked off this episode when we talked about the country song
Yeah. Yeah.
from Anthrax. We had Deep Purple, Anyone's Daughter, the goofy song. That's your Jamaica off of Fireball, almost
Yep.
in a way. The tossed off of Why Are You Wasting Space with This
Yep.
kind of idea, right? Gillen, No Laughing in Heaven, too comedic on Future Shock. We had Gillen, New Orleans, goofy cover. We had Kiss, I Was Made for Loving You, another textbook one. We had Megadeth, Breadline. Dave trying to be socially conscious, and it's very poppy, and it was a flagship song from it. We had Poison, Unskinny Bop. Throw that in with your 17 and your cherry pie. We
Yep.
had Queen, Killer Queen, maybe, maybe not, but it's like, is Queen sort of like an old what do they call that, dance hall music band kind of thing. Let's see, and we have Queen, Radio Gaga, and I'll turn it over to you for highlights from the rest of the list.
Yeah, also Queen, I Want to Break Free, right? And that's the single, and the video, I think, also was a turnoff to some people. And yeah, especially here in the States. I know over in the UK, nobody minded that at all. But that was kind of like all of a sudden Queen are becoming like this kind of jokey band and just going for singles, not about the albums anymore. We got the Rolling Stones with Emotional Rescue, right? Doing their disco thing. We got what else? The Who, Squeeze Box, kind of this fun little weird poppy quirky song from them. Wings, Silly Love Songs. Interesting, because that's on an album where there's a lot of varied material from everybody contributing to the band. And I think some people are kind of like, it's, Silly Love Song, such a silly pop song, a great silly pop song, I might add. But the rest of the album is probably like that. There's actually some good rockers on there as well. We've got some more covers. We got Anthrax with Pump It Up, Raven, Give Me Some Lovin', Saxon doing Christopher Cross's Ride Like the Wind. I mean, just crazy. David Lee Roth, Just a Gigolo. Megadeth, Anarchy in the UK from their So Far So Good So What album. And then, we have some songs that I think also are very indicative of this, and people probably wonder when we're going to mention them. You have the Extreme, More Than Words off of Porno Graffiti, right? Which it's so unlike everything else on the album, and how many people who are not hard rock or metal fans went and bought that album because they love that ballad, and then the rest of the album's nothing like that. Same thing with Kiss and Beth from Destroyer, right? Just so not indicative of everything else they'd ever done, and certainly on that particular album. So,
yeah. Nice.
Yeah. Cool. All right, Martin, get us caught up quickly on what's going on with your stuff.
Well, as always, there's the audio podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The last one was about the greatest bands of all time. Did one about Black Sabbath intros. The 2 new books the last little while are these ones. I've got them priced at the same as all of those big visual biographies, but they cost a little less to import and stuff. I'm probably charging a little too much for them, so I may come up with some sort of deal down the line when people have bought these, and I'll give a big bit off for some other books or whatever. But yeah, those are at the site now as well. One way to think about them is they are imports. They're done on a very low print run, and it's a way to have your own physical collection of photography. So much of everybody's photography is just on the computer sort of thing. So if you're going to have a collection of photos, these are big visual hardcover books, but mostly about the live experience. So that's Queen, Live, and Zeppelin, all at martinpopoff.com. And we've got the Contrarians as well. And we've got our other podcast we started with John Gaffney, Kicked in the Teeth, and AC/DC podcast.
Cool. All right. Thanks for watching, everybody. We've got coming up later today, Ken Golden and Professor's Picks. We've got 4 Fusion Friday happening tonight. We've got the Review Crew tomorrow with Jamie Laszlo and company, and then George Lemay and I will be ranking the albums of the great South American, from Brazil actually, progressive metal, power metal act Angra. So that's coming up on Sunday. So lots happening. This is on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together all the damn time. Join Martin and I next Friday here at the Funhouse. We'll be moving back into ranking these catalogs of mixed bands. We're going to go to the California kind of glam metal, hair metal scene. We're going to be looking at, what do we say, Motley Crue, Dokken, Great
Rat,
Whites,
Quiet Riot, maybe?
Rat, and
Great
Quiet
White?
Riot. Yeah, and
Yeah.
yeah,
The ones that all started early, the ones
Yeah.
that started early and just take it to the end of the 80s. Yeah.
Yeah. So we're gonna throw those '80s albums into a pile, and we're gonna rank them as we like them, and that's coming up next week for all you folks that love the ranking stuff, and obviously you do, as we've seen by the last month or so. So we'll see you then. For Martin Popoff, I'm Pete Pardo. Enjoy your weekend, everybody. Have a good one. Bye bye.